People interpret complementarianism as ending in different places, don't they? Like, can women lead a Bible study that men are in, or whatever? But I do think if you are going to train and equip women, you lead to disappointment if they're trained and equipped and then can't exercise how they have been trained and equipped. So I think training and equipping is not a panacea, and if it happens in isolation from consideration about where those women are going to be able to serve, then you actually can lead to disappointment.
Hello and welcome to Independence, the FIEC podcast where you'll hear teaching and resources for church leaders. It's all to help independent churches work together to reach Britain for Christ. My name's Elinor Magowan. I'm one of the Women's Ministry Coordinators at FIEC, and today I'm joined by Kathryn Jackson and by Rachel Sloan. I wonder if you can just introduce yourself and tell us what you do. Kathryn, would you like to go first?
So I work for Cornerstone Church in Nottingham. I work for them 3 days a week. I've done that for the last 7 years, and prior to that I taught history and loved it.
Oh, great. Well, I did history at uni, and so I'm keen
kindred
to hear
spirits.
That's right, yeah. Rachel, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, so I work for Charlotte Chapel, which is up in Edinburgh, as their Women's Ministry Coordinator. I have done that for 9 years this month. And a year ago, I joined the staff at the FIEC with Elinor as the other Women's Ministry Coordinator. So
great. Well, it's lovely to have you both here. Kathryn, tell us a little bit about how you got into ministry. History teacher, now working in ministry. How did that happen?
It's hard to give a succinct answer to that, because I guess there were many, many strands, and it would be fair to say that I was pushed as well as pulled. So I loved history teaching, and I still hold a bit of a flame for it. But after my second child, I didn't want to return to work with the same amount of leadership responsibility as I had in the school, or for the same number of days, and school were not terribly accommodating of that. So I began to think, do I look for a job in another school, or what do I do? And at the same time, the Lord was kind of laying on my heart that maybe it was the moment to take some of what I was doing voluntarily at church. So I was already kind of leading our evangelistic women's craft evenings and that kind of thing, and do something with it. And then lo and behold, a job was advertised, and it just felt like the Lord led. But it was definitely a push out of what I was doing, as well as a pull in, because I loved history teaching. So yeah.
Rachel, was it similar for you, a push and a pull, or how did you get into ministry?
So I would say that I guess had more of a pull than a push in that sense. Doing youth work and ministry throughout my university years, I kind of developed a desire to be involved in ministry more full-time as, I guess, a career, but didn't know what that looked like or how to do that. Didn't particularly want to do youth work as a job, partly because at the time I saw people did that for a couple of years and then they went off and did something else, and I was like, well, I would like to do ministry longer term. So in the end, I, after graduating, did a PGCE and went into primary teaching. Which was probably where I was pulled into primary teaching. My mum was a primary teacher, and growing up I'd said I'd never be a teacher, but God had other plans. And then a couple of years into teaching, again, just wanted to explore more of what ministry would look like, thought about going to a Bible college, and then just speaking to my minister, he said that we were going to be starting up an apprenticeship program at our church, and would I like to apply for that, which I did. So did the apprenticeship alongside Cornhill up in Glasgow, and pretty soon after starting that was very much, this is what I want to do. This is what I want to kind of commit my life to. And then thankfully there was a job at Charlotte Chapel, so it kind of fairly quickly fell into place, bringing me into the role that I'm in now, which was great.
Isn't it great how the Lord leads us as individuals and uses circumstances and shapes us, and uses other people too to bring us into a position of service and ministry. Kathryn, tell us a little bit about Cornerstone in Nottingham. What's the church like, and what's your ministry there?
So Cornerstone is a large church, I guess, by UK standards. So kind of at the moment, in this kind of post-COVID moment. I guess we have about 300 people at our 9:15 service, again about 300 at our 11:15, and 100 or 150 and so at our 7 p.m. So that's the kind of scale of church that we are. We are diverse. We are ethnically very diverse. We are demographically very diverse. So I think we have got people in every decade up to their 90s. So great kind of variety. Yeah, it's good.
Good. And your ministry there, how does that fit in to the life of the church?
I have a really pretentious title. I'm called a director of ministry, but I'm not the only one. There are several of us. But yeah, we're directors of ministry. Yeah. I think it's meant to make us sound a little bit important. But really, it means kind of, I guess, coordinating volunteers for various things. So I have generic leadership responsibility. So I'm part of our leadership team. That doesn't mean I'm an elder. That's a separate kind of group. I'm part of our leadership team. So sit in our leadership meetings, whether that's weekly review meetings or mobilisation meetings or whatever, pastoral meetings, whatever it is, I sit in those. And then I have a kind of overview of our work with families and an overview of our work with women and various other bits and pieces that don't really belong anywhere that have been shoved onto my list.
So lots of variety and lots of working with volunteers too as well. Yeah, great. What about you, Rachel? Is it a similar kind of role or different in
maybe probably a similar church, different role. So Charlotte would be a similar size. Our membership's about 550, 600. City centre church, so get the whole kind of demographic of people, and actually quite a good ethnic mix within that. We have a very strong student population as well, and again, like you said, the whole kind of range. And what we find at Charlotte is you have the generations as well. So I think we have one family of which four generations are all in the church. So lovely. Which is great. Within my role, I guess I'm predominantly women's ministry, so that's kind of coordinating the different roles for women, the ministries within women, training and equipping our leaders, but I'm also involved in our young adults ministry as well, so doing a kind of similar role there. So that'll be the kind of the two things, and then I guess a bit similar, just anything else that you kind of gather along the way.
There's plenty of that.
Yeah, absolutely.
You never quite know what a day is going to bring, do you? No. And you both work part-time as well, don't you? Do you work part-time or is it full-time?
No, I'm 3 days a week, but I work it over 4, which I am really grateful to church for, because it means I can do school drop-off and school pick-up for my primary age children. So 3 days, but spread over 4.
Lovely, yeah.
Well, I guess just gone so the past year's been part-time. I guess my time at Charlotte's been varied. So the first 3 years I was full-time. Then I did a degree at Edinburgh Theological Seminary, and that was kind of part of my role, but it meant that a good part of my time at the church was involved in being in class and studying. And then this past year has been, I guess, officially part-time. So just 2.5 days and the other here with the FIEC. So,
And for me, being married to one of the pastors, we know that ministry isn't really, you can't always contain it to hours, can you? It's life too, isn't it?
Yeah,
and,
absolutely.
We can explore that maybe another time, but it's, we're responding to needs, aren't we?
Yeah.
And, you're working with families too, aren't you, Kathryn? So, and with women, students, they don't just, you don't just do it. No, not at all.
No, I can often find the school run is part of my ministry.
Yes, that's right. That's right. And we can't, compartmentalize in many ways, can we? Yeah. You love what you're doing now, Kathryn? Would you say?
I love what I'm doing now. I do love what I'm doing now. I still might not do it forever.
Yeah.
I do love what I'm doing now. I do wonder whether it is what I will do for the rest of my life. I find there are struggles with the limit on how I can lead that I find challenging. Having had far more leadership responsibility in my life. before this role.
So you feel that's part of your gifting and your character? And,
yeah. So I think if you were to ask me what my two gifts were, I would say teaching and leading, and there is a limit to how they can be used in a complementarian context, which I'm extremely comfortable with the theology of that. I support that theology, but I don't know whether it means I am a natural fit to stay in this role for the next 25 years of my life.
And I think that's really healthy that you're acknowledging that, and yet you're embracing complementarianism.
And I've got huge support of the church as I kind of explore those issues, and the elders are part of those conversations and kind of looking at what lies further down the line. But for now I do love it. But I don't look at it and think this is my forever job.
Right. So what is it you like about it? What is it that you do enjoy?
People are fantastic, aren't they? People are interesting, and they throw you curveballs all the time, but and watching people follow Jesus with more of their life is just thrilling, isn't it? When they surrender another part, it's just brilliant. I love it. I love it when I go into homes and you can see them flourishing, and you can see them reading the Bible with their children or whatever, and you think, I played a little role in that because I shaped that a little bit. That's just really satisfying. So those things are wonderful.
And am I right in saying that women's ministry, so that's more of the sort of family side of the work that you're doing, and women's ministry, overseeing that, has been a development in your role?
So we do now have kind of weekly women's Bible study, which wasn't a thing before I was on the staff team. And that's great. That's a real joy, because that intergenerational thing is just so fantastic. And I'm not sure it happens in other places in society, does it? You see, the 80-year-old telling her story to a young mum, and you think, this is really special. Like, there's something going on here that's really, really great.
It's so important,
it is fab.
It's lovely to be able to be part of that, isn't it? And see the dynamic and the way in which God is working. And
the wisdom of people who have walked longer with the Lord being shared with people who are newer in their journey is just such a joy. It's brilliant.
I mean, that's very much part of your role, isn't it, Rachel?
Yeah, absolutely. So we have a regular Tuesday morning Bible study, and part of, I guess, in the past that had been more traditionally seen as the mums group. One of the things that I kind of have tried to do, and is in just the language that we talk about it, is just say it's for women who are not working or are free on a Tuesday morning. And so try and make it much more of that intergenerational thing, that you have the students, the young mums, all the way up to the 80-something-year-old coming along, because I think it's such an important part of what we do to get women to come together to learn around the Bible together, but also to share their wisdom and kind of talk to one another, share with one another, pray with one another, and just have that connection with each other. So that is, it's a big part of what we do.
And what would you say then are the sort of joys of your role, ministry?
Well, I guess similar to Kathryn, is seeing that kind of stuff happen. So seeing women come alongside each other, share with each other. So we, in our Bible study, we are now at the stage where we write our own studies. So when I started, they were using study guides, which was great. But actually, one of the things that's been a joy to see is some women just growing in their confidence, knowing I can do this, I can take a passage, I can write a study, and then I can teach it to others. And that's helped their own faith, but just their confidence in handling God's word has been such a joy to see. And the kind of confidence that it's given them and the skills and the abilities that they have to do that. And just the joys are when you see people taking their faith and putting it into action where it makes a difference in their everyday life, whatever context they're in, is really exciting.
Tell us a little bit more about how you've gone through that process of working with the women who lead that group, and helping them to write their own studies. And
well, it was kind of a staged process. So after we moved on from using the study guides, I was writing the studies myself. So I guess that was just getting people used to kind of a different way of doing the studies. And then I basically just got a group of women who were keen, who were interested, did a couple of sessions with them all on how do you understand the Bible, how do you write a Bible study, and then went through, I don't remember the first thing that we did, but we kind of did an overview of that kind of book that we were doing, gave them all a passage, got them to go and write a study. And then I think for that very first and probably the second time we did it, I met up with them and we kind of talked through the study. They asked any more questions. And so very much kind of tried to give them feedback in person. Over time, that's got a bit less because they know what they're doing. So they just send me a study and I kind of format it. And most of the time we use it as it is. And it's just been great to kind of have that variety. Once, not only just kind of giving them confidence, as I said, but you see kind of slight different styles within each study. And that's really exciting to see different perspectives on what they're doing.
I'm just listening to you, wishing I had your wisdom. So when we launched, genuinely, when we launched our women's Bible study, I was like, we're going in with Romans because we are going to prove we can do this as well as the men. And it was fantastic. But each week I'd be like sweating, thinking, oh my goodness, why have I bitten off this?
Yeah. Well, I think it's great to do those because we've done a Bible overview, we've done Exodus, we did Hebrews, we've done Revelation,
brilliant,
we've done Daniel. And again, because I wanted us to show the women as well that we can do all these books that maybe some people are like, oh, that's a bit tricky, isn't it?
I just wish I hadn't had that streak like for the very first thing that we did. Could have built up to that rather than going in and setting the bar there.
Well, I think it's good to do, isn't it?
Yes,
Take that challenge on and keep running with it. It's great.
Yeah. And then, so what do you feel is distinctive then about the women's group, the women's Bible study? Because you said, we're doing it like the men, the men do it. So why have you decided that you will have a women's Bible study this now?
For a number of reasons. One of which is that the women who can come to it are often women who wouldn't find it easy to go out in the evening. So some of our elderly women who don't like driving in the evening when it's dark or whatever, or women who rely perhaps on a taxi to get them to church or something, or women with very young children who are just exhausted and their kids won't go to bed or whatever. But also because I do think we see an honesty and a vulnerability in that context that is above and beyond what we see in a mixed group. So only last week, it's just a lovely story, but I went for a walk with one of the women who attends, and she was telling me about how another woman in the group is paying for swimming lessons for her children because they'd been able to share at quite a deep level about some of her struggles. And I just don't think you get that degree of honesty all the time when there are mixed groups. So it's really special. People are vulnerable, and we have a large percentage of the women who come to our women's Bible study actually have adopted children, and they say that what they love about it is it's not a context which is perfect. So because people are vulnerable, they found it easier to be vulnerable about those struggles than in a context where they perhaps feel like everybody's children are really well behaved and really well turned out or whatever. So I just think it's a more warts and all context, and that's really special.
Yeah.
And it really does allow for that kind of intergenerational mixing that, again, might not always happen in quite the same way in other contexts. And I think it just puts Titus 2 into action, isn't it? Where you're encouraging the older women to come alongside the younger women and having God's word at the centre of it, isn't it?
And I think we can all testify to how that's been part of our own growth in our faith and in our trust in the Lord. I always say
that our women's Bible study is actually my greatest training because it's training in how to live. So as the older women tell me what they have done and the decisions they've made, and I feel like if you're gonna ever stand and teach people, you also need to hear people's life stories because that helps you teach pastorally. So I feel like the women's Bible study is my training, my weekly training in life.
Yeah. You then take that with you and think, right, well, what am I going to do as a result? Yeah. Well, that's wonderful. What do you think are the challenges for you, Rachel, in terms of women's ministry?
Well, I guess there's some in that is just even what we've been talking about, getting people involved and helping people have the confidence to know that they can be involved in either walking alongside women or doing ministry. So I think there can be just in a challenge in encouraging women that they can do things and can take part, depending on what context they've come from or what teaching they've had in the past as well. And I guess then just wider with women in ministry, there's just the challenge of working out, I guess, what the roles look like. I guess a little bit like you were sharing earlier, just how do we use our gifts in ways that are appropriate, and how do we explore that? How do we encourage more to happen where it can, and help people to flourish and see the goodness in what God is calling us to as women within our churches?
Does that resonate with you, Kathryn?
Yeah, I think one of the challenges, and this is it's not just for me, this is kind of anecdotally the kind of things that you hear, is often that if it's a woman on a staff team, they often feel not that well communicated with. So decisions are taken by the elders or whatever, and actually often the women hold very busy integral roles but haven't been fully briefed on a decision that's been taken or whatever. And I think you can sometimes find yourself kind of defending the church, but you don't really know why the decision's been taken, or you weren't even aware that the decision had been taken or whatever. And suddenly you're the public face trying to defend something that the elders have done, but you haven't been adequately communicated with about that decision. So I think that's a challenge for a lot of women in a lot of churches, and
conversely a challenge for the elders, the male elders, to be able to respond to and communicate well. How does that happen at Charlotte Chapel? You're on staff there. How does that happen with you? How are things communicated?
I have a unique role at Charlotte in that I take the minutes at our elders meeting.
That is cunning.
So there's an element where some of that is, there's parts of elders meetings where they are exclusively for the elders. But I think Paul works so he's the senior pastor at Charlotte, and he works quite well at making sure that things are communicated with that. It goes in waves, but I think that's a helpful thing to have for even just that awareness for the pastor or the elders to know that actually communicating with all your staff is something that needs to be done. So how is that going to happen? I think sometimes some of these things slip through the net because it's a challenge of moving from having one person on staff to a team. And so how do you communicate well with your team with the different roles within that? And I think as I look back, one of the things that I think at Charlotte we can put in a little bit more is actually even just the regular communication of me with the elders. It's wonderful when the elders have confidence in you as a woman that they just allow you to get on with your work. But I think just it's good practice for me to feed back to them, to let them know what I'm doing in our ministry, because ultimately it's under their oversight and their vision. So they need to know what I'm doing and share with that and kind of go, yes, we're happy for you to keep going. That can be as much as it is, I think.
Yeah. And that's not particular to being a woman in ministry, because there are other staff members like a Carey, there are other staff members who are male who aren't on the eldership, and so that communication needs to happen with them too. So we need to be careful, don't we, as well, that we don't think, it's because I'm a woman that I'm not being communicated with.
And the same with that kind of oversight, I think, of the elders. I think it is that balance of you don't want to be micromanaged, but at the same time you want to ensure that what you're doing is under the vision of the elders, and they know that, and kind of there is that two-way communication on all sides, isn't it?
Really important there's a structure for that, and that kind of systems are in place. And I know it sounds a bit dull, but if it just comes down to the lead minister almost setting it as a New Year's resolution, I must try harder, I will communicate better, it will last about 3 weeks and then fizzle out. Like, there has to actually be a system in place for how this is going to happen, whether that's minutes getting circulated to the staff team, or whether that's the staff team are all invited to come to the elders once a month or whatever it is, but there has to be some sort of system or structure rather than just a good intention, I think.
And because you're both in larger FIEC churches, we need to realise that this isn't just for larger FIEC churches, it's for smaller churches too. If there's a woman on staff or another staff member, then
or even
needs to be thought about, doesn't
even
it?
a leading woman in the church who's not on staff, but who is really well respected, and the elders value the opinion of and things, and kind of rely on to disseminate things amongst the women. They need to be communicated with well.
Well, at Carey, our women's ministry leader isn't a staff member, but the same thing applies. What as you look back, you've been at Cornerstone 7 years.
Been on the staff team 7 years. I've been there 19 years, but staff team 7 years. Yeah.
And Rachel, you've been
9 at Charlotte.
What do you think would have helped you in the role? Kathryn.
I appreciate that with time, greater openness has begun to just exist between the staff team. So I think we have a better, healthier dialogue going. And I think that I feel more able to articulate the things that frustrate me, whereas probably initially I was just really, really chuffed and grateful that I'd got a job that worked around childcare. It was wonderful. Whereas I'm probably a bit more assertive about things now, but I think genuinely in a good way, and feel invited to be like that and to express where I think things haven't helped, not only me but other women on the staff team thrive. I just feel more able to articulate that, and I really think churches should have a really healthy culture kind of around that. I often say to my lead minister, well, if it's the kind of thing you'd think is important to tell your wife at home, then it's probably important to tell like the women at church, or if it's something you'd involve her in a discussion with at home, then at church include us. And there's just more openness around all of that now, which is great. Really great.
Well, that's really good to hear.
I think in some ways for me, looking back, it's finding ways to get that kind of almost outside mentoring / support within a church, which sometimes can be harder depending on the context. I mean, often in Scotland there's not a huge number of us doing roles like mine, so it's kind of harder to do that. But actually, just I guess like we've been saying, for the women in our church, it's really beneficial to hear of someone who's gone before you, and so being able to have, I think, something like that, just to kind of go, we're thinking of doing this with that work, this is happening in our church context. Have you come across that? Or even like you're saying, the relationships with the staff team, how do you manage that? How do you negotiate that? How do you share things? Being able to talk to someone about that, I think, would have been really helpful looking back.
And it's something that you would encourage, women in ministry to really look for. And actually all women really, Christian women, to look for somebody who's older, who can really give that input. And I was reading Melissa Kruger's book, Growing Together. And she talks about two trees, and you're tied to the tree that is older and that can help you on. That's right. That's really good. Maybe the one last thing just to touch on, intentionally equipping women for ministry. How do you think churches can do that? What's your soundbite on that one?
Can I be controversial?
Yeah.
I want churches to think about another question running alongside that. So I see women who have possibly been they've worked for an organisation like UCCF, they've been staff workers, they've been team leaders, they've had actually quite a lot of training, quite a lot of equipping, they're highly skilled, they're gifted, they felt very valued in a context like UCCF, and then they work for a church and they're like, I'm not being allowed to do all that much. And that's fine. But, I think, people interpret complementarianism as ending in different places, don't they? Like, can women lead a Bible study that men are in, or whatever? But I do think if you are going to train and equip women, you lead to disappointment if they're trained and equipped and then can't exercise how they have been trained and equipped. So I think training and equipping is not a panacea. And if it happens in isolation from consideration about where those women are going to be able to serve, then you actually can lead to disappointment. So I'm all for women being trained and equipped. I want women to be able to handle the Bible brilliantly, but I don't want women's expectations to then be disappointed by how they can exercise them. So I just think churches have to think, if I train loads of women in this, where am I actually going to release them to serve? And the two questions have to go in my mind, have to go together.
And I guess it's that church having thought about, well, what, like you said, there's a whole range of how complementarianism gets worked out in our churches. The church needs to think about that too. What does it look like in our church context? So what are we encouraging the women into? What are we training for? So it's like you said, it's the two things, isn't it? It's the training, the gifting, but releasing as well, and giving them the opportunities to do that. Within, again, the whole range that there is within a church for a woman to serve. And I think also prizing and celebrating the whole range of things as well, because I think sometimes we can praise one thing above everything else, and it's almost like if you're not openly standing in front of others teaching the Bible, then you're not ministering. Then you're like, well, actually, how can we even encourage that you're the mum with her 2-year-old? This is a form of ministry. How can we equip you to do that better, and know that that's equipping you too? And we're behind you and celebrating that as much as we're celebrating the woman who's leading the Bible study and giving a talk. The whole range of gifts, isn't it? And encouraging them within.
And the single woman who is courageously sharing the gospel in a really hostile workplace is serving the Lord as much, and her evangelism is to be applauded, and all of those kind of things. So I think I just want church to think about the whole thing together, not in isolation, I guess.
And the countless things that women are able to do. And I think, like you say, valuing the unseen as well as the seen, and the public as well as the private. But thinking, what are we training women for? And really equipping them for that, so that they are fulfilled and comfortable within the view that we hold on complementarianism, and realizing that there's a lot of different positions within that as well. Good. Well, thank you ever so much, and it's been great to chat together this afternoon. Thanks for listening to Independence, the FIEC podcast. For more resources for church leaders, do subscribe to this podcast on your favourite podcast app, and visit our website at fiec.org.uk. Thank you, Kathryn, and thank you, Rachel.
Thank you.
It's been fun.